I was sitting in the glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor when I realized my husband had been planning to erase me from our company for at least 6 months. The view of downtown behind me, the bay glittering in the late afternoon sun, and I remember thinking how beautiful everything looked even as my world was actively ending. Marcus wasn't even there. He'd sent his new chief operating officer, Richard Vaughn, to do the dirty work. Richard, who I'd personally hired 2 years ago, who'd attended our anniversary dinner just 3 months prior, who couldn't look me in the eye as he slid the severance agreement across the polished mahogany table. The restructuring, he called it, though we both knew restructuring was just corporate speak for betrayal wrapped in legal paper. 8 years. I'd given 8 years to building Technova from a garage startup into a company worth $2 billion. Every late night debugging code while Marcus schmoozing investors. Every product launch I'd orchestrated while he took the stage and accepted the applause. Every technical miracle I'd pulled off while he collected awards for innovation he barely understood. And now, beginning to show you exactly how I got here. How a series of small betrayals built into something catastrophic. How the person I trusted most in the world became the architect of my professional execution. Before I continue, I want to thank you for being here. If you believe that brilliance should never be silenced by betrayal, please hit that subscribe button. Your support helps these stories reach others who need to hear them. Now, let me show you how this perfect storm began. It started 18 months ago, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Marcus came home from a Stanford alumni event buzzing with enthusiasm about reconnecting with an old friend. Jade Sinclair, he called her, though he'd never mentioned her name in the 8 years we'd been together. She was brilliant, he said, absolutely wasted at her current position at a mid-tier tech firm. He was practically vibrating with excitement as he paced our Nob Hill apartment, gesticulating wildly the way he did when he'd convinced himself of something. We should bring her on board at Technova, he announced, already decided before consulting me. Vice President of Innovation. She's got exactly the kind of forward-thinking vision we need to scale. I was skeptical. We already had a strong leadership team, people I'd personally recruited and trained. People who understood our technology because they'd built it alongside me. But Marcus had that gleam in his eye, the one that appeared when he'd already made up his mind and was just waiting for everyone else to catch up to his genius. I should have paid more attention to the details. The way he kept checking his phone during dinner that night. The way he laughed too loudly when describing Jade's accomplishments. The way he seemed to need me to approve of her before I'd even met her, as if my blessing was crucial to some larger plan. But I was tired. I'd just finished leading our team through a critical system migration that had consumed 3 weeks of 18-hour days. I was operating on exhaustion and trust, a dangerous combination when dealing with anything that requires scrutiny. Jade Sinclair walked into Technova on a Monday morning in March, and I knew immediately something was off. She had that particular brand of confidence that comes from knowing secrets nobody else knows yet. Her handshake was firm but brief, her smile professional but calculated. She dressed like someone performing the role of tech executive rather than being one. All sharp blazers and statement jewelry that seemed designed to distract from the fact that her questions about our technology were surprisingly superficial for someone hired as Vice President of Innovation. But Marcus was enchanted. He personally gave her the office tour, introduced her to every department head, made sure everyone knew she had his full support and confidence. I watched from my own office, the one I'd earned through 8 years of 16-hour days and technical breakthroughs, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not quite suspicion yet, but not comfort either. Something in between, like the moment before you realize you've made a terrible mistake, but haven't quite identified what it is yet. Jade's first week was a masterclass in corporate infiltration, though I wouldn't understand that until much later. She scheduled one-on-one meetings with every senior team member, asking questions that seemed innocuous, but were actually reconnaissance. What projects was I leading? What was my management style? Who were my closest allies in the company? What systems did I have exclusive access to? She took notes in a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my team's monthly coffee budget, nodding thoughtfully as people spoke, performing the role of engaged listener while actually cataloging vulnerabilities. She was particularly interested in our upcoming project Helios, the quantum computing breakthrough I'd been developing for 2 years. The project that would revolutionize data encryption and put Technova decades ahead of our competitors. The project that was so sensitive, we'd kept it compartmentalized, with only 5 people having full access to the research and development. I'd led that. Jade asked about it during our first private meeting, her tone casual, but her eyes sharp. Marcus mentioned something about a quantum initiative, she said, examining her manicured nails with practiced disinterest. Sounds fascinating. I'd love to learn more when you have time to brief me. Something in her voice made my instincts flare. The way she said Marcus mentioned, as if they'd been having private conversations about my work. The way she assumed access to classified projects in her first week. The way she looked at me, like she was measuring something, calculating trajectories I couldn't see yet. I gave her the public pitch, the sanitized version we used for board presentations and investor meetings. General concepts without specific implementation details. She nodded along, but I caught something in her expression. Disappointment, maybe. Or frustration that I wasn't handing her everything on a silver platter. She left that meeting empty-handed, and I told myself I was being paranoid, that the exhaustion from recent projects was making me see threats where none existed. I should have trusted my instincts. The first real warning sign came 6 weeks after Jade's arrival. Marcus started having private dinners with her after work, strategy sessions he called them, though he'd never needed strategy sessions with any other executive. When I asked to join, he deflected with practiced ease. It's just boring operational stuff, babe, nothing technical. You'd be bored to tears. Besides, you're always complaining about not having enough personal time. Take the evening for yourself. The words were considerate, but the subtext was clear. I wasn't invited. I tried to rationalize it. Marcus had always been social, always networking, always building relationships. This was probably the same thing, just his management style applied to a new executive. But then I noticed other things. The way Jade would reference conversations I hadn't been part of during leadership meetings. The way Marcus would instinctively turn to her first when discussing future planning, as if my opinion had become optional. The way they'd sometimes share a look across the conference table, some private joke or understanding that excluded everyone else in the room. My team started noticing too. Carlos, my lead architect who'd been with me since year 1, pulled me aside after a particularly strange meeting where Jade had confidently made claims about Project Helios that were completely wrong. And Marcus had nodded along as if she'd revealed profound wisdom. Boss, he said quietly, his expression troubled. Something's not right here. She doesn't understand the technology, but she's positioning herself like she does. And Marcus is letting her. I told Carlos I'd handle it, though I had no idea how. Then came the exclusions. Meetings about company direction that I wasn't invited to. Strategic planning sessions that somehow happened without the chief technology officer. Budget discussions about my own department conducted in my absence. I'd find out about major decisions through email chains I'd been accidentally copied on, or worse, through my own team members who'd heard about changes through the grapevine. Each exclusion felt like a small death, a systematic erasure of my authority and presence in the company I'd built. When I confronted Marcus about it, he employed the gaslighter's favorite weapon. Concern for my well-being. You seem stressed lately, Elena, he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. I've been trying to reduce your workload, give you space to focus on the technical work you love instead of all the administrative burden. I thought I was doing you a favor. He made it sound so reasonable, so considerate, that I almost believed him. Almost convinced myself that being systematically excluded from company leadership was actually a gift. The way his phone screen lit up with a text from Jade, and the speed with which he turned it face down. The slight flush that crept up his neck. The way his eyes wouldn't quite meet mine when he talked about reducing my workload. These were tells I'd never seen before in 8 years together, new behaviors that suggested new secrets. I didn't want to believe what my instincts were screaming at me. That this wasn't just about work. That the betrayal might be both professional and personal. I started paying closer attention after that. The late-night texts that Marcus would hide by angling his phone away. The way he'd suddenly started wearing cologne to the office, something he'd never done before. The new workout routine that had him leaving the house at 6 in the morning when he'd previously been a committed sleep until 8 person. The way he'd started dressing better, caring more about his appearance, exhibiting all the classic signs of someone trying to impress someone new. I told myself I was being paranoid, reading too much into innocent changes. I was wrong. 3 months after Jade's arrival, I got accidentally added to an email thread I clearly wasn't supposed to see. Marcus's assistant, Jenny, who'd always been in my corner, must have included me by muscle memory before realizing the thread was confidential. The subject line was innocuous: Q4 planning documents. But the content was anything but. Richard Vaughn had written to Marcus and Jade about transition strategies and leadership restructuring timelines. My name appeared in the third paragraph, clinical and detached, as if I were a problem to be solved rather than a person who'd built their company. The Elena situation, Richard had written, and those 3 words made my blood run cold. Needs to be handled delicately. She's got too much institutional knowledge to simply terminate, but we need her out before the IPO. Suggest generous severance package and strict NDA to prevent her from discussing proprietary developments with competitors. Jade can assume CTO role officially once Elena's transitioned out. Timeline: 60 to 90 days. I read it 5 times, each reading making me feel more nauseous. They were planning to erase me from my own company. And they'd been planning it for months. I forwarded the email to my personal account before it could be recalled, my hands shaking so badly I could barely type. Then I sat at my desk, surrounded by 8 years of work, and understood something fundamental about betrayal. It's not the moment when you discover it that destroys you. It's all the moments before, when you were being lied to and manipulated and you didn't know it. All those dinners and meetings and strategy sessions had been about removing me, and I'd been so focused on my work, so trusting of the man I'd married, that I'd missed every single warning sign. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I accessed Marcus's computer while he was in the shower. I knew his passwords because we'd always been open with each other, or so I'd believed. His laptop yielded a treasure trove of information that made the email seem gentle by comparison. There were messages between Marcus and Jade going back 16 months. Not just professional collaboration, but intimate exchanges that made me want to throw the computer across the room. My brilliant wife, Marcus had written, has no idea how replaceable she's become. Jade's response: good. Keep it that way until we're ready. But the personal betrayal, as devastating as it was, paled in comparison to what else I found. Encrypted files showing that Jade had been systematically selling elements of my Project Helios research to Technova's biggest competitors. Small pieces, carefully distributed so no single company got the full picture, but together representing millions in lost competitive advantage. She'd been spying on my work from day one, with Marcus's full knowledge and cooperation. They weren't just planning to remove me. They were planning to profit from stealing my innovations. The files showed a sophisticated operation. Jade had been using her position at her previous company to establish relationships with our rivals, dangling tantalizing hints about breakthrough technology they could access through the right channels. Then she'd positioned herself at Technova specifically to gain access to my work. Marcus had known. He'd recruited her for exactly this purpose. The affair was probably just a convenient bonus, a way to ensure complete loyalty and cooperation. They'd been conspiring against me since before she'd even walked through our doors. I spent that entire night downloading everything onto encrypted drives. Every email, every file, every piece of evidence that showed exactly what they'd been doing. Marcus slept peacefully in our bed while I systematically documented his betrayal in excruciating detail. By dawn, I had enough evidence to destroy both of their careers. The question was what to do with it. I could go public immediately, blow everything up, satisfy the screaming rage that wanted to burn their world down. Or I could be strategic, patient, wait for the perfect moment when my revenge would do maximum damage. I chose patience. And that decision would prove to be the smartest move I'd ever made. The next 6 weeks were the most excruciating performance of my life. Every morning, I kissed my husband goodbye, knowing he was planning my professional execution. Every day, I smiled at Jade during leadership meetings, knowing she was actively stealing my life's work. Every night, I came home and pretended everything was normal while gathering more evidence, documenting more betrayals, building a case so airtight that no lawyer in the world could defend against it. I felt like I was living in a spy thriller, except the villain was the person who promised to love me forever. I started noticing other things during this period of hypervigilance. The way Richard Vaughn had been systematically excluding me from key investor meetings. The way the board had started asking Marcus for technical explanations instead of coming to me directly. The way my access permissions to certain systems had been quietly downgraded, so subtle I almost didn't catch it. They were laying groundwork, building a narrative that I was less essential than I actually was, preparing the company to function without me so my departure would seem natural rather than the coup it actually was. I also noticed something they hadn't anticipated. My team was loyal in ways Marcus couldn't understand because he'd never actually built anything himself. Carlos started leaving me encrypted messages about changes being made to Project Helios behind my back. Priya, my quantum specialist, documented every time Jade asked invasive questions about our security protocols. Even Jenny, Marcus's own assistant, began subtly warning me about meetings I was being excluded from. These people weren't just coworkers. They were allies who recognized what was happening even if they didn't know the full scope. The board meeting where they executed their plan was scheduled for a Tuesday in September. I knew it was coming because Jenny had slipped me a copy of the agenda, with item 7 highlighted, executive restructuring discussion. They'd scheduled it for 10 in the morning, probably because Marcus thought I'd be less likely to make a scene before lunch. They'd even arranged for Richard to handle the actual conversation, keeping Marcus at a safe distance so he could pretend to be the sorrowful husband forced into difficult business decisions. I arrived early, carrying a leather portfolio that matched the one Jade always used. Inside was every piece of evidence I'd gathered over 6 weeks of investigation. I also brought something else. A patent application I'd filed 3 months earlier, before I'd even known about their betrayal, that would prove crucial to everything that followed. Project Helios, the quantum computing breakthrough they were planning to steal and claim as company property, was actually patented under my name personally. I'd done it as a precaution after some early weird behavior from Jade, an instinct I hadn't fully understood at the time but now recognized as self-preservation. The meeting started exactly as I'd anticipated. Richard, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit, delivered the news with corporate precision. The company was reorganizing its leadership structure to better position for the upcoming initial public offering. My role as CTO would be transitioned to Jade Sinclair, who would bring fresh perspective and innovation to the position. I would be offered a generous severance package, including $500,000, continued benefits for 18 months, and a glowing recommendation. All I had to do was sign the non-disclosure agreement and non-compete clause. Simple. Clean. Final. Marcus sat at the far end of the table, performing the role of reluctant executive making tough choices. He wouldn't look directly at me, kept his eyes on his phone, occasionally nodding as Richard spoke. Jade sat beside him, trying to maintain a neutral expression, but failing to hide the satisfaction in her eyes. She'd won, or so she thought. She'd infiltrated the company, seduced the CEO, stolen the technology, and now she was claiming the title that should. The board members looked uncomfortable, but they'd clearly already been briefed and convinced that this was the right move. I let Richard finish his entire presentation. Took my time reading through the severance agreement even though I'd seen a draft of it weeks earlier. Let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable for everyone in the room. Then I closed the portfolio with a definitive snap that made several people jump. Thank you for that comprehensive explanation, Richard, I said, my voice steady and professional. I appreciate the company's generous offer. However, I'm afraid I can't accept it. The confusion on their faces was almost worth the months of betrayal. Before anyone could respond, I opened my own portfolio and began distributing packets. One for each board member, one for Marcus, one for Jade, one for Richard. They were thick, professionally bound, with a cover page that read, "Evidence of corporate espionage, patent infringement, and fraud." I watched the color drain from Jade's face as she opened hers. Watched Marcus's hands start to shake as he flipped through pages of his own messages, printed out for everyone to see. Watched the board members' expressions shift from confusion to shock to anger as they processed what they were reading. The next 30 minutes were spectacular. I laid it out with the same precision I used for technical presentations, each piece of evidence building on the last. Jade's history of corporate espionage at her previous company, something Marcus had never bothered to check before hiring her. The systematic theft of my research and its sale to competitors, complete with financial transactions traced through offshore accounts. Marcus's full knowledge and cooperation with the scheme, proven through hundreds of emails and messages. And finally, the critical detail that changed everything, my personal patent on Project Helios, making their planned IPO based on stolen technology legally impossible. One board member, Christine Yang, who'd always struck me as sharp and uncompromising, stood up so fast her chair rolled backward into the wall. "This is what you brought us here to approve?" She was looking at Marcus with undisguised disgust. "You wanted us to sign off on removing the one person who actually owns the technology that makes this company valuable?" Her voice kept rising with each word. "Do you understand what you've done? What you've exposed us to? We could lose everything. We could face criminal charges. Are you completely insane?" Marcus tried to salvage the situation with his usual charm and deflection. "Elena's clearly upset about personal issues in our marriage," he started, attempting to paint me as an emotional woman making accusations from spite. "This is a lot of speculation and circumstantial evidence presented in bad faith." But Christine cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Stop talking," she commanded. "Just stop. I've been in this industry for 30 years, and I can read a smoking gun when I see one. This isn't speculation. These are your own messages, your own words, documenting crimes you committed against your own wife and company." Jade had gone completely pale, her earlier confidence evaporated. She looked at Marcus as if hoping he'd find some way to fix this, but he was drowning in his own exposure. Richard was already typing frantically on his phone, probably trying to reach the company's lawyers before this spiraled further. The other board members were having rapid whispered conversations, the kind where legal liability got calculated in real time. I sat quietly, watching my carefully constructed revenge play out exactly as I'd planned. Almost exactly. The best part was still coming. I waited for the chaos to settle slightly, then dropped the final bomb. "There's one more thing you should know," I said, pulling out another document. 3 days ago, I filed a lawsuit against Technova for patent infringement. My attorney has also submitted evidence of the corporate espionage to the Securities and Exchange Commission. And this morning, I held a press conference announcing the formation of my new company, Apex Innovations, which will be launching a competing product built entirely on my own patented technology. The IPO you were planning for next month? It's dead. And Technova's valuation just dropped by about 90%. The room exploded. Marcus was on his feet, face red, sputtering accusations of sabotage and betrayal. The irony of him using those particular words was not lost on anyone. Jade looked like she might be sick, probably calculating how many years in prison corporate espionage and securities fraud could carry. Christine was already on her phone with the company's legal team. The other board members were in various stages of panic, understanding that their company had just imploded and their reputations were about to be destroyed alongside it. It was chaos. It was perfect. Security escort was arranged, but this time it was for Marcus and Jade, not for me. They were both immediately suspended pending investigation, escorted from the building by uniformed guards while employees lined the hallways watching. I heard later that someone started a slow clap as they did their perp walk through the lobby, though I can't confirm that personally. What I can confirm is the look on Marcus's face as he was led past my office, the office I'd occupied for 8 years while building his company into something valuable. He looked at me like I was a stranger. Like he'd never really known me at all. He was right about that. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Within 48 hours, the SEC had frozen Technova's assets pending investigation. Marcus and Jade clients were abandoning contracts. The entire house of cards they'd built on my stolen work collapsed in less than a week. It was the kind of corporate disaster that gets taught in business school ethics classes as a cautionary tale. Meanwhile, I was busy. Dr. Sarah Chin, my former mentor from MIT who'd become one of Silicon Valley's most successful venture capitalists, had been waiting for my call. I'd briefed her on the situation weeks earlier, as soon as I'd understood the full scope of the betrayal. She'd immediately offered to fund my new company, recognizing that the technology I developed was revolutionary regardless of the corporate drama surrounding it. Within a week of leaving Technova, I had $15 million in seed funding and an office space leased in Palo Alto. My former team followed me en masse. Carlos was the first to resign from Technova, walking into the board meeting 2 days after my big reveal and announcing that he'd be joining Apex Innovations as chief architect. Priya followed the next day, then Miguel, then Sarah, then the entire quantum computing team I'd built. By the end of the month, 37 of Technova's best engineers had jumped ship, all of them citing hostile work environment and ethical concerns as their reasons for leaving. The brain drain was so severe that Technova couldn't function, couldn't fulfill existing contracts, couldn't do anything except hemorrhage value and reputation. Jade's downfall was particularly spectacular. Turns out she'd been running a similar scheme at her previous company, something my investigators had uncovered, but I'd saved for maximum impact. That company filed their own lawsuit, as did 2 others where she'd apparently worked the same con. The SEC investigation expanded to cover securities fraud from stock sales she'd made right before her schemes were exposed. She was facing multiple felony charges across 3 states, with prosecutors competing to see who could make the most aggressive case. Last I heard, her lawyers were trying to negotiate a plea deal that would still leave her in prison for at least 5 years. Marcus's situation was different, but no less devastating. The board offered him a choice: resign immediately and accept a small severance, or be fired for cause and lose everything. He chose resignation, probably hoping to preserve some dignity and future employability. But the tech world is small and gossip travels fast. Within weeks, everyone knew what he'd done. How he'd tried to steal his wife's innovations. How he'd been willing to commit corporate espionage for profit. How he'd put his own company at risk for an affair with a criminal. His reputation was radioactive. No serious company would touch him. The divorce proceedings were mercifully swift, mainly because I had so much evidence of his affair and financial misconduct that his lawyers advised him to settle quickly and quietly. I kept the Nob Hill apartment, the investment portfolio we'd built together, and my half of everything else. He kept his shame and a rapidly dwindling bank account as legal fees mounted. His parents, who'd always looked down on me as not quite good enough for their brilliant son, stopped returning his calls after the full scope of his failures became public. Turns out they cared more about social status than family loyalty. Eleanor, Marcus's mother, actually reached out to me privately 6 months after everything imploded. We met at a quiet restaurant where she apologized for every condescending comment, every subtle put down, every time she'd made me feel like I didn't belong in their family. "I was wrong about you," she said, tears in her eyes that seemed genuine. "You were always the brilliant one. Marcus was just coasting on your work, and we were too blinded by pride to see it." I appreciated the apology but declined her invitation to stay connected. Some wounds healed better with distance. Apex Innovations grew faster than anyone anticipated, even Sarah, who'd seen dozens of successful startups. Within 6 months, we launched our quantum encryption platform, the one based on my project Helios research that Technova had tried to steal. Within a year, we'd signed contracts with 3 major tech companies and 2 government agencies. Our valuation hit $3 billion 18 months after founding, making it one of the fastest-growing tech companies in Silicon Valley history. More importantly, we'd built a culture based on transparency and respect, everything Technova had failed to be. But the sweetest revenge came from an unexpected source. Remember Technova, the company Marcus and Jade had destroyed? The board eventually decided to sell it rather than try to rebuild from the ashes. They approached multiple buyers, but nobody wanted a company with such damaged reputation and depleted talent. Until I made an offer. Apex Innovations acquired Technova's remaining assets, patents, and contracts for $50 million, roughly 2.5% of its former valuation. I rehired the employees who'd stayed loyal, honored the contracts they couldn't fulfill, and essentially absorbed what was left of my old company into my new one. Marcus tried to block the sale, claimed I was buying it purely for revenge. The judge pointed out that revenge would have been letting Technova die completely rather than preserving jobs and honoring client relationships. The sale went through. I took possession of Marcus's old office, the corner one with the stunning bay views that he'd always claimed as CEO. I didn't even redecorate. Just moved in, set up my computer, and got back to work doing what I'd always done best. Building the future while others played politics. The tech press had a field day with the whole saga. Articles with headlines like From Betrayed Wife to Billionaire CEO and The Woman Who Turned Corporate Espionage into Empire appeared in every major publication. I did a few carefully selected interviews, keeping my focus on the technology and the company rather than the personal drama. But I made sure certain facts were always included, that I'd built Technova's core technology, that Marcus had tried to steal it, that Jade had attempted to sell it to competitors, and that their betrayal had ultimately led to their own destruction. The truth was damaging enough without embellishment. Jade eventually took a plea deal that sent her to federal prison for 7 years. Marcus avoided criminal charges, but faced a mountain of civil lawsuits from investors who'd lost money on Technova's collapse. Last I heard, he'd filed for bankruptcy and was working as a consultant for a mid-tier firm, the kind of position that would have been beneath him in his CEO days. His LinkedIn profile still listed him as founder of Technova, as if that title wasn't now synonymous with catastrophic failure and ethical bankruptcy. Some people never learn. I discovered something interesting during the aftermath. Jade had been targeting other women in tech, using similar schemes to steal their work and advance her own career. One of them, a brilliant young engineer named Aisha, had been her intended next victim when I exposed the whole operation. Aisha reached out to thank me, explaining that she'd noticed warning signs but didn't trust her instincts. My very public revenge had saved her career before it could be sabotaged. That's when I started the mentorship program that became a core part of Apex Innovation's mission. We now dedicate resources to identifying and supporting women in tech who show exceptional promise, not as charity, but as strategic investment in talent that others overlook or undervalue. 50 young women have gone through our program in the past 2 years, and several have already founded their own successful companies. Some people called it generous. I called it building an army of brilliance that would ensure the next generation didn't have to fight the battles I did. Though they should definitely be prepared to fight if necessary. Carlos, who'd been my first ally and remained my closest friend through everything, once asked me if I ever regretted how I handled it. If I wished I'd just walked away quietly and started fresh without the confrontation and public drama. I thought about it for a long time before answering. No, I finally said. They wanted to erase me quietly, make me disappear as if I'd never contributed anything meaningful. They deserve to be exposed loudly, to have their betrayal documented and publicized so thoroughly that everyone understood exactly what they'd done. Silence protects abusers. Exposure is the only real accountability. The Apex Innovations office is different from Technova in every meaningful way. Open floor plan instead of status-segregated offices. Transparent decision-making instead of secret executive meetings. Profit sharing for all employees instead of stock options that only benefit the top tier. We celebrate technical achievement with the same energy most companies reserve for sales numbers. When someone solves a difficult problem, the whole company knows about it. When someone fails while taking a smart risk, we analyze the learning rather than assigning blame. It's the culture I wanted to build at Technova but couldn't because I was married to someone who saw employees as resources to exploit. Sarah Chin, my mentor-turned-investor, told me something profound about 6 months into Apex's explosive growth. You know why this is working so well? She asked during one of our monthly strategy dinners. It's not just because you're brilliant, though you are. It's because betrayal taught you what loyalty is actually worth. Most founders have to learn that through business failure. You learned it through personal devastation, which made you fundamentally different as a leader. You built this company to be the antidote to everything Technova was. People feel that authenticity. They trust it. That's why they're following you. She was right, though I wouldn't have admitted it at the time. Every policy at Apex, every cultural norm, every way we structured teams and made decisions was a deliberate rejection of what Marcus had built. Where he had been secretive, I was transparent. Where he had hoarded credit, I distributed recognition. Where he had built hierarchies based on politics and personal loyalty, I built systems based on competence and merit. It wasn't just about building a successful company. It was about proving that success didn't require the kind of toxic behavior that had become normalized in Silicon Valley. The personal healing took longer than the professional triumph. For months after the divorce, I'd wake up at 3 a.m. with my mind racing through every moment I'd missed, every warning sign I'd ignored, every time I'd trusted when I should have questioned. I went to therapy, something I'd never considered before because I'd always prided myself on being mentally strong and self-sufficient. My therapist helped me understand that being strong doesn't mean being invulnerable. That trusting people isn't weakness. That being betrayed says more about the betrayer than the betrayed. I dated cautiously after the divorce, always waiting for the betrayal I now expected. But then I met Dr. James Wu at a quantum computing conference in Geneva. He was a researcher at CERN, completely outside the Silicon Valley ecosystem, unimpressed by valuations and venture capital drama. Our first conversation was a 3-hour debate about quantum entanglement applications that started at a networking reception and ended at a coffee shop at midnight. He had no idea who I was, hadn't followed the Technova scandal, and was genuinely shocked when I mentioned running a company. I thought you were just another researcher, he said, laughing. You talk about the science like someone who actually cares about it rather than what it can be monetized for. That authenticity, that complete disconnection from the world that had destroyed my marriage, was exactly what I needed. We've been together now for a year, taking it slow, building trust through consistent honesty rather than grand gestures. He understands when I work late because he does the same. He celebrates my technical breakthroughs with genuine enthusiasm rather than seeing them as threats to his ego. He's never once asked me to be smaller, quieter, less brilliant to make him comfortable. It's the relationship I didn't know was possible until I stopped settling for less than I deserved. The tech industry itself has slowly been changing, partly because stories like mine kept happening and finally reached a critical mass where they couldn't be ignored anymore. More women in leadership positions. More transparency about compensation and equity. More consequences for executives who abuse power or engage in misconduct. It's not perfect, nowhere close, but it's better than it was. And every time another woman tells her story of workplace betrayal and fights back instead of disappearing quietly, the calculus shifts a little more toward accountability. I received a message from Marcus about a year after everything ended. It came through LinkedIn of all places, a long rambling note that tried to reframe history and claim some kind of moral high ground. He wrote about how ambitious I'd become, how the success had changed me, how he'd only wanted what was best for the company. There was no real apology, no acknowledgement of his actual betrayal, just a narcissist's attempt to rewrite the narrative where he was the victim of my cold ambition rather than the architect of his own destruction. I read it once, blocked him, and never thought about it again. Some people will die before admitting they were wrong. Jade sent a letter from prison about 6 months into her sentence. Unlike Marcus's self-serving revisionism, hers was something closer to genuine remorse, though it was hard to tell how much was real versus strategic positioning for parole hearings. She wrote about how she'd convinced herself that everyone in tech was playing the same game, cutting corners and stealing ideas, and she was just being honest about it. She claimed she'd never meant to hurt me personally, that it was just business, that she'd been caught up in Marcus's manipulation and charisma. I didn't respond. Her regret, real or performed, didn't undo the damage or earn my forgiveness. But I did something unexpected with both of those messages. I saved them. Not as trophies or for any sense of satisfaction, but as reminders. Reminders that betrayal often comes wrapped in justification and self-deception. That people will rewrite history to preserve their own self-image rather than confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. That apologies without changed behavior are just more manipulation. I keep them in a folder labeled Never Forget on my secure drive, along with all the original evidence from their scheme. Not because I need revenge anymore, but because success makes you forget the lessons that got you there. The mentorship program I started has become my proudest achievement, possibly even more than Apex's financial success. We've created something called the Phoenix Initiative, named specifically for the idea of rising from ashes of professional destruction. It's not just for women who've been betrayed or sabotaged, though many of them find their way to us. It's for anyone in tech who's been underestimated, overlooked, or actively suppressed because they don't fit the traditional founder mold. We provide funding, mentorship, technical resources, and most importantly, a community of people who understand what it's like to have your work stolen and your contributions erased. Last month, one of our Phoenix Initiative ments, a woman named Keisha who'd been forced out of her startup by her male co-founders, secured $40 million in series of funding for her artificial intelligence company. She credited the program with teaching her not to internalize the gaslighting, to document everything, and to know her worth regardless of who tried to diminish it. At her funding announcement, she wore a t-shirt that said, "They tried to bury me but didn't know I was a seed." I cried watching her pitch, seeing her confidence and clarity, knowing that she wouldn't waste years of her life doubting herself the way I had. The tech industry has a short memory and a hungry appetite for redemption narratives, which meant people eventually started asking me if I'd ever forgive Marcus. If there was a path to reconciliation, or at least peaceful coexistence. The question always annoyed me because it revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what forgiveness means. Forgiveness isn't about restoring relationships or pretending betrayal didn't happen. It's about releasing the anger so it stops consuming your energy and attention. I forgave Marcus in that sense, not because he deserved it, but because hating him was exhausting and unproductive. But forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation or redemption. Some bridges should stay burned. 3 years after founding Apex Innovations, we went public ourselves. The IPO that Marcus had wanted for Technova, the one that would have been built on my stolen work, instead happened for my company built on my openly acknowledged innovations. We priced at $75 per share and closed the first day at $112. The valuation hit $8 billion, making me one of the youngest self-made female billionaires in tech. Forbes did a cover story. Fortune named me Executive of the Year. Time included me in their Most Influential People issue. It was surreal, overwhelming, and deeply satisfying in ways that had nothing to do with the money. But the best moment came during the IPO celebration. My entire team was there, the original 15 who'd followed me from Technova plus the hundreds we'd hired since. Carlos gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry in equal measure, talking about how we'd built something worth more than its valuation because it actually valued people. Priya presented me with a framed photo from that first week in our scrappy office, all of us exhausted and terrified and hopeful. Dr. Chin raised her glass and said, to Elena, who proved that loyalty to your own brilliance matters more than loyalty to people who don't deserve it. And then Jenny, Marcus's former assistant who'd risked her own position to warn me about the conspiracy, stood up with tears streaming down her face. You gave me my career back, she said. When I resigned from Technova to join you, everyone said I was crazy to follow someone who'd been fired. But you showed me that integrity has value. That doing the right thing even when it's terrifying actually leads somewhere good. This company, this success, it's proof that you don't have to be ruthless to win. You just have to be right and refuse to give up. The entire room erupted in applause. I thought about giving a speech, something inspirational about perseverance and believing in yourself. But instead, I just said thank you. Thank you for following me when I had nothing but plans and anger. Thank you for building this with me. Thank you for proving that loyalty goes both ways. And thank you for being the kind of people who make success actually mean something. Then I raised my glass and added one more thing, to everyone who tried to erase us and accidentally gave us the motivation to build something better. We should send them fruit baskets. The laughter was genuine and joyous, the kind that comes from shared survival. The industry watchers love to frame my story as a revenge tale, and I suppose on some level it is. But revenge was never the goal, just a satisfying side effect. The real goal was refusing to be erased. Refusing to let someone else claim my work, my contributions, my value. Refusing to disappear quietly into a generous severance package and non-disclosure agreement. Marcus and Jade wanted me gone, wanted to pretend I'd never been essential, wanted to build their empire on my stolen foundations while I watched from the sidelines. Instead, I took everything they wanted and built it better, built it ethically, built it into something sustainable. There's a photo that circulates sometimes on social media, usually with captions about karma or justice. It's from a tech conference about 2 years after everything happened. I'm on stage giving a keynote about quantum computing applications, and in the audience, barely visible in the crowd, is Marcus. Someone snapped the photo at the exact moment when the camera cut to audience reactions and caught his expression. He's staring at me with this mixture of regret and resentment and unwilling admiration. That photo probably gets shared because it's a perfect encapsulation of consequences. The person who tried to erase you forced to watch you succeed beyond his wildest dreams. But I don't actually think about Marcus much anymore. He's become irrelevant, a footnote in a much larger story about building something meaningful. Sometimes people ask me if I ever wonder what would have happened if he hadn't betrayed me, if we'd actually built Technova together the way I'd believed we were doing. The answer is no, because I've seen what happens in that timeline. I would have kept building his company while he took credit. Kept making him successful while remaining in a need someone to blame for their own inadequacies. The betrayal, as devastating as it was at the time, actually saved me from wasting more years on someone who never valued me properly. The lessons from that experience inform everything about how I run Apex. We have a strict anti-retaliation policy for employees who report misconduct. We do regular anonymous culture surveys and actually act on the feedback. We track promotion rates and compensation by gender and ethnicity to catch bias before it becomes systemic. We make our executives accessible rather than isolated in corner offices. We celebrate technical achievement as loudly as business wins. None of these policies are radical or innovative, they're just basic respect operationalized into corporate structure. But they're revolutionary in an industry that's built on exploitation and ego. Last month, a young entrepreneur reached out asking for advice. She discovered her business partner was trying to edge her out of the company they'd built together, using almost the exact playbook Marcus had tried on me. She was